A couple of days ago, Mr. Sensible hosted a flat earther by the name of Lunacy on his channel. They had a very nice conversation when touched on a number of subjects. Went on for 2 hours and 40-some minutes. I didn't watch it live, but I did watch the first just under an hour yesterday and felt like I wanted to do some responses to some of the things in the video. I'm going to be doing separate videos for the latter part of the conversation as well. This first 50 minutes or so, they covered NASA, the moon landings, supposed moon landing hoaxes, etc. And that's what we'll be looking at here. I'm going to play you a little bit of the video.
And I believe the Americans are looking to return to the moon relatively quickly, aren't they?
They've been talking about that for like 20, 30 years.
Yeah, but we got the whole Artemis thing. I mean, they are making developments towards it. I hope they do. I mean, okay, let's just say, just for the sake of argument, it's now 5 years' time, and the Americans said, yep, we're on our way to the moon, and they show you the landing with modern cameras and so on. Are you going to accept it then?
Oh, I'll have to see it.
Yeah. Well, yeah, of course, yeah.
I mean, it's one of those, you got to cross that bridge when you get there.
Yeah.
I mean, of course, I'd approach it with an open mind, but...
I mean, some of the arguments I've seen...
Okay, Lunacy Lander says he will approach it with an open mind. Mr. Sensible, when we've had that mission, I hope you will invite Lunacy Lander back onto your channel to talk with him about it and see how open his mind actually was as to what he saw. Here are a couple of things about the Artemis mission that people might want to know. This is NASA's page about the Artemis 2 mission, which is currently scheduled for November 2024. It's a good little article, gives some background, what they're planning to do, introduces the crew, there they are, and gives this nice little diagram of what the mission's path is going to be. So I'm going to read from my notes here. Artemis 2, currently scheduled for November 2024, is a flyby mission with no moon landing. The path will certainly be known when it takes place, and I suspect it would be possible with a good telescope to actually see the craft. Now I'm going to add, I may be wrong about that. I'm no expert on telescopes, and if I am, some of you watching this might chime in and let me know. But it's my understanding that with a really good consumer-grade telescope, it might well be possible to see Artemis, even if it's just as simply an illuminated dot. If the sun is hitting it right, it could be quite bright, bright enough to see against the background. It might be possible to actually see it, like say, pass into the shadow of the moon or behind the moon. And these are all things that could be coordinated with its flight path so that people looking at this little dot in the sky through a telescope are confident that they're actually seeing Artemis and that it's following the path that NASA claims it's following. Okay, back to my notes. I would encourage Lunacy to contact his local Sidewalk Astronomers Club. They are all over the USA. There's a good chance members of the club will be watching, and he might get the chance to see it himself. I'm going to put links to all these websites in the description. Sidewalk Astronomers is a great group. I've always found them very welcoming. They are exactly what it says. They set up on sidewalks not outside at night. They've got their own telescopes. They're all just regular folks who do it as a hobby. Some of them have really good equipment. Some of them have modest equipment. I've always found them to be friendly, and if you ask nicely, they're happy to let you look through their telescopes, tell you what they're working on. I should think that when Artemis is set to fly, they will probably be out there. So, Mr. Lunacy Lander, here's a chance for you to do a little bit of your own research. Find out where the local Sidewalk Astronomers Club is, connect up with them, and when the time comes, be there and watch it yourself. At some point later in the video, and I'm not finding the spot right now, Lunacy mentions, he says kind of like, well, why couldn't we ever go back to the moon? As if it were impossible, as if we just couldn't manage it anymore. And I'm not finding the spot. If I do find the spot again, I'll reinsert it in here, but I'm going to give my response. These are my notes. The USA made no efforts to return to the moon after Apollo 17 in December 1972, not because we couldn't, but because U.S. government policies took on entirely different goals with the 1973 oil crisis. Political priorities and the priorities of the public changed. The moon landings were great propaganda to demonstrate American technological supremacy over the USSR, but once that was done, it was done. There was no reason to keep beating that drum. The Apollo program was expensive, and there were more productive ways to use NASA money to advance science and technology. So the focus shifted away from sending people to the moon or Mars, and instead we focused on sending unmanned vehicles much deeper into space, with programs like the Voyager mission. From a scientific and technological standpoint, we gained much more from those. As we got better with robotics, we also refocused on sending rovers to Mars. Then, of course, there were the incredible space telescopes. I've saved the ISS for last because it's actually the closest of all our space programs and hardly qualifies as a, quote, space program at all, being more of a glorified satellite. It's been great, though, and has advanced science in its own way at comparatively little expense to manned moon missions. So I'm going to repeat, it's not that we couldn't return to the moon, it is that there was no good reason to. There were better things to do with the money. Now, that meant that the infrastructure that was put in place for those Apollo missions gradually fell by the wayside. It went out of use and was no longer needed, so it was dismantled. And so when we hear people say we can't do it, what they're saying is that that infrastructure is gone. We can easily create new infrastructure using better technology we have today, and they're in the process of doing that with the Artemis program. We're now at about 15 minutes, 30 seconds into the video, and the conversation has moved on to the photograph that Neil Armstrong took of Buzz Aldrin when they were on the surface of the moon, and you could see Neil's reflection in Buzz Aldrin's visor. This is what Mr. Sensible is referring to here, and we'll play a little clip.
Back in the late 60s,
Yeah.
someone would have found something about it. And have you seen that guy? He took. Do you know? I might have the. I'll have a look while we're talking because I think I might have a photograph I can show you. The photograph of Buzz has a reflection in his visor, and this guy had the brilliant idea of taking that reflection and unwrapping it. So obviously we know the shape of the visor and how it would be mirror reflecting. I bet I can't find it. And he took that and put it through a computer to unwrap that reflection. I don't think I've got it. Not where I thought I might have it.
I've done it myself.
What, the unwrap?
Yeah.
Okay. And what did you think about that?
I mean, you can unwrap it to a certain degree. Yeah, and I mean, of course, if they took that picture on the anywhere, they're going to have to show that reflection.
There's going to be a reflection.
Yeah.
All right, if you guys want to go and watch the whole video, you can. I don't want to play too lengthy of clips because it'll make my own video too long. But our friend here, Lunacy, says that he did it himself. Well, this is what Mr. Sensible is referring to. The guy's name is Michael Ranger. He's an Emmy Award-winning 3D generalist and compositor. That's how he describes himself. This is his channel. There's a link, of course. This here is the video, Unwrapping Buzz Aldrin's Visor Reflection. This is extremely sophisticated, skillful work using really good 3D digital tools. I am not convinced that Lunacy Lander here has done it. If he has, more power to him. I would like it if he would share that with all of us, perhaps, for example, by publishing it in a video. There's a link to the video in the description, and it's, as Mr. Sensible said, you can see the landscape. What we're seeing is what Buzz Aldrin saw when Neil was taking his picture. Quite an amazing thing. And Lunacy here says he's done it himself. See, the whole conversation is about how would you create all this with CGI, and we're talking about 1960s technology. It's ironic because now Lunacy Lander is going to go on to tell us how amazing the technology was back then on the part of the government. So amazing that they had so much technology that they were able to fake all of this, but they actually didn't have the technology to fly to the moon. That seems to be his logic.
Sorry. But yeah, that was a fantastic picture because no one was expecting that. That guy had that idea. He unwrapped it, and you could see Neil. You could see the lander. You could see, I'm not sure you could see the flag, but you could see some other bits of equipment. And you could even see up in the sky a very, very small looking Earth. So when they...
All right, this is Michael Ranger's video. Let's take a look and see what we've got going here. For a start, we've got Buzz Aldrin. We're seeing what Buzz Aldrin was seeing when his photo was taken by Neil Armstrong, and there's Buzz's shadow. And there's... I'm not sure if that's Earth on the horizon. We'll see Earth further along. There's Neil Armstrong with the camera, getting ready to take the picture. No, that was the flag. That was the American flag. Excuse me. There you go. That there was the American flag they put out. That's probably just some piece of equipment. You can see the shadow of the flag on the ground here. And there's Earth. There's Earth up in the sky. Wasn't sure what this was, but I think that it might be even the edge of the visor or something like that. Something quite high up overhead. And there's the landing module. So that's what Buzz was seeing, and that's the unwrap that Michael Ranger did. Pretty remarkable piece of work. Okay, you'll find the link to Michael Ranger's video in the description. I don't want to play it all here. We'll move on. We'll return to Mr. Sensible now, and we're going to talk about just how diabolically clever the U.S. government was in 1969.
Allegedly faked it, they'd have had to think to put all that stuff behind the cameraman, which no one was would have been expected to see.
Oh, absolutely, the U.S. government would have had that all pre-planned out.
Absolutely, the U.S. government would have had that all pre-planned out. So Lunacy here is saying that in 1969, when they embarked on this gigantic hoax on the American public, the world public, they knew that decades later, people would have the technology on computers on their desktops to unwrap the reflections in the visor. So they had better make sure that the reflection in the visor also looked like a moonscape, etc., that could be, digitally that could be actually real 3D. I mean, this is his view on how they accomplished this hoax. They're so... Okay, let me read my notes. There are two problems here. The first is a common problem of Lunacy's throughout the debate. He has no evidence that NASA actually did have this planned out. He only surmises that they could have. Yes, people can act dishonestly, but unless you have evidence that they indeed have acted dishonestly, you can't justify accusing them of having done so. So he's presented us nowhere in this debate with actual evidence of these hoaxes. He has simply said that it could have been a hoax. They could have pre-planned it all out. Oh yeah, they're very smart. They could have planned the reflections even to make sure that even the reflections were realistic. Yeah, they're so smart and they're so advanced in all of this hoaxery. It's not a word, but it should be. That they can do all of that, but they can't actually fly to the moon. They can do everything else, but they can't fly to the moon, according to him. It's kind of confusing. So back to my notes. Second, the digital technology to do that visor unwrap didn't exist at that time in 1969. At least nothing like it was available to the American public until a good 2 decades later, so NASA would have had to have been amazingly prescient to anticipate that decades later this digital technology would exist, be available to average people with cheap computer equipment, and this entire, quote, moon landing hoax discussion would be happening at all. So he says the U.S. government would have all that planned out. Oh, we're 22 minutes in, and at this point, Mr. Sensible has read a super chat. You can see it on the right of the screen. How were they able to fake cosmic ray spallation and 10 kilometer per second micrometeorite impacts with 1960s technology? Grumpy Old Mechanic is pointing out that there was stuff going on for real that would have been way beyond what could have been faked. We're going to get Lunacy's response here, which is that he thinks that the U.S. government was far more sophisticated in its abilities than it let on to the public.
You can sit there and invoke, well, it was 1960s technology, but the SR-71 Blackbird jet was 1960s technology.
Yeah, it was.
It's decommissioned now,
yeah,
and still has classified technology on it.
Yeah.
So
sorry, go on. You go on. I've talked a lot. Go on.
Oh, but yeah, the whole technology side of the 60s does not make a difference. When you're talking about the U.S. federal government, believe me, they're light years ahead of us on certain things.
Okay, he says the U.S. government is light years ahead of us on certain things. So going back to my notes, if the government is ahead of us, and therefore we can point out that 1960s technology trails 21st century technology in important ways, then maybe the U.S. government actually had the technology to go to the moon in the 1960s, and did in fact go to the moon in the 1960s using 1960s technology. Lunacy is being very selective here. He's all fine with the SR-71 Blackbird and the super technology that's involved in that. Yep, we did that. That's for real. But we didn't have the technology to go to the moon. It doesn't match up. He's being very selective here. Later in the conversation, they move on to the moon buggy and moon buggy dust. We'll take a look at that next. Okay, we have moved ahead to just past the 28-minute mark, and they're talking about the lunar rovers now. And once again, Lunacy Lander is trying to use the argument that since they could have faked things, they must have faked things. They can't. You have to assume they faked things if it's possible to fake things. Well, Mr. Sensible is pointing out quite rightly that the pattern of dust coming from the wheels of the lunar rover is not something you can fake on Earth. The parabolic curves, well, you would have to, for a start, you'd have to be running the thing inside a vacuum to get those parabolic curves with no wind resistance. You'd have to be in an atmosphere-free environment. So he had mentioned, Mr. Sensible mentioned that he had done a video in the past on that, and I found the video. I'm going to put a link to it and show it to you here briefly. But first, let's listen to a little bit of the conversation.
Not only that, there was film of the moon buggy. I've used that before because that's damn good evidence that could not have been filmed on Earth.
Just depends on where you filmed it.
Nope.
I mean, absolutely. You could absolutely replicate that shot. And to say that you couldn't replicate the lighting in any of those pictures or videos is a complete farce. You can replicate just about any lighting on Earth.
It goes in nice parabolic arcs. There's no air there. If there was air there, then the dust would get diverted. It would not go in nice. They're called rooster tails. If you have a look at that film of the lunar rover whizzing around, you can see the dust flowing up in nice parabolic arcs, and the moment that they stop, everything falls down. You know, there's no remaining dust above the ground. I was going to say in the air, but there's no air, of course. So that's why I would say I don't think you could fake that on Earth.
It would depend on. No, I see what you're saying. I mean, rooster tails. Yeah, I know what you're talking about. I think part of that is due to one. It would, I guess, if it were being faked, okay.
Yeah.
There would be one, the medium that they're driving on. We'd have to know exactly what that was. So if it was being faked, you'd have to know what it was they were driving on top of.
Lunacy here is setting us up with an impossible problem. He's saying that if it was being faked, these lunar rovers, we would have to know perfectly what this dust was that they were using. Well, if this thing was being faked on a film set of some kind in 1969, and the whole thing is supposed to be meant to be a secret kept from the entire world, guess what? They're not going to give us samples of the dust they use on the film set in 1969. It's an impossible to obtain piece of evidence. So his argument is basically, look, we can't prove that it wasn't faked because it could have been faked. And if they had the right kind of dust and the right kind of film set, they could have faked it. So therefore, we can't accept that what they've shown us is real. However, he also can't prove that it was fake. He's saying, I can't prove that it was faked because they've set it up so that I can never get the evidence to prove that it was faked. It's impossible to get the evidence to prove that it was faked, but I'm sure it was faked. This is his whole method of argument. He's saying he cannot obtain the evidence because the very conspiracy that he's trying to fight against is concealing the evidence. Well, that's total nonsense. It's an impossibility. He has no argument. If you don't have the evidence, you've got nothing. I'm going to bring in a little bit of politics here. I don't know Lunacy Lander's politics, but basically this is the same argument that a whole lot of Trump supporters who have been advocating that the election was full of fraud. They use the same argument. They say, well, the whole system is set up against us, so they hide all the evidence of fraud, but we know fraud happened, but we can't get any evidence because it's all hidden from us. It's the same nonsense. And I don't know if Lunacy Lander is one of those, but it wouldn't surprise me if he was. Look, if you don't have the evidence, you've got nothing. So go get the evidence. Okay, enough of my ranting on that point. We're going to go and this is the debate that Mr. Sensible had a year ago with our favorite Kyle Adams, in which they did looked at the moon buggy clips, and they talked about that whole issue. I'll put a link to that video since it ties in with this subject, and Mr. Sensible mentioned it in passing in the video that we're looking at today. But also, we're going to look at this video, which is the source of that clip. I think it's the source Mr. Sensible used for the original clip. It's not like a NASA channel or anything. I don't know this channel, but it seems to be the original video. I could probably track the video down at the NASA website, but I think this will do. And we'll just watch a few seconds of it here. We see this was Apollo 16, and they called it the Apollo 16 Grand Prix. They wanted to take the thing out and see how fast they could go with it and how much they could maneuver with it. So we're seeing the dust coming off the wheels and immediately settling back down onto the ground with no suspension in the air. We'll get some good views of the rooster tails, especially as it turns around and comes back towards us. We keep watching the dust coming out from under the tires there. There's sound on the original video, but I've turned it off. All right, he's coming back around, and we should get some good views of those rooster tails. They're quite remarkable, and you'll see they follow perfect parabolic arcs, immediately settling with no drift, no suspended dust particles. There you see it, boom, like that, coming off. There's another one, another, and another, and another, and another. It's really amazing. That's a good one. Okay, that's enough. We got the idea. You see how fast it all settled back down onto the ground? So these are all linked in the description. Now I'm going to go back over to my notes and see what I had written in my notes. 2830. Mr. Sensible explains at 2920. The dust coming from the buggy wheels followed clean parabolic paths, etc. Lunacy points out the tires, but the fact is that there's plenty of dust even with the tires, and as far as not knowing what the dust might be, if it was in fact faked, he insists we need to know what the dust is. So that was what I was saying before. And then at 3211, Mr. Sensible responds that he actually did a video about the dune buggy rooster tails. That's the video I just showed you, link in the description. 3820. Mr. Sensible asks, would not Russia have called out the U.S. if the moon landings were hoaxes, since they were sworn enemies? Lunacy sidesteps the question by saying we don't know what was going on behind the scenes. There you go again. We don't know what was going on behind the scenes, and they will never tell us what was going on behind the scenes because it's a big conspiracy to keep it away from us. So, again, the evidence is hidden forever and impossible for us to reach, so it must have happened. There must have been a conspiracy because we can't get any evidence for a conspiracy. I mean, what better proof that there was a conspiracy than the fact that they're concealing the evidence of the conspiracy? That's his logic. I can't believe it. It's so fifth grade. Okay. Continuing with my notes, let's see if there's anything else worthwhile here. He might as well be saying, if I'm right, there would be no way for me to prove I'm right. Since I have no evidence, I must be right. All right. Okay, at 44:16, there was discussion of the animation of the moon landing. And I have my notes. Yes, an animation was prepared to show the TV public. However, the voice broadcast was live and only delayed by a few seconds. I may be wrong about how many seconds. I'm pretty certain it was live, but delayed a little bit. But they could only broadcast the voice live, and obviously they couldn't put a camera on the moon to record the first moon landing. So the TV networks, what was it? I think it was CBS. They created an animation, which was clearly marked animation, to illustrate what people were hearing in the voice broadcast. And I've tracked down a video that has a piece of that. We'll take a look at that for a moment here. All right, another video. I'll have to put a link in the description. We don't need to watch the whole thing. I'm just going to scroll ahead and see if I can find a spot where it's got animation marked on the screen. I just want to make the point that there was no deception involved in any of this. Here, I've skipped ahead a little bit. Here we see, it says animation. It shows up more clearly in some of the other spots. There it is. Animation. So, no deception involved. It was obviously physically impossible to have a camera on the moon to record the first moon landing, so this is what they did instead. It's no more mysterious and conniving than that. There's a longer version of this. It's just 9-minute video. There's a longer version. In fact, I feel like I think it's this one here. There's an entire 5-hour long documentary that PBS put out in the 1990s in which they dug up 6-hour long. There it says animation again. So PBS put this together in the 1990s. They went back and found all the old news footage, and they assembled 6 hours worth of news footage of the Apollo missions. So for any of you that want to spend 6 hours watching it, there'll be a link. After discussing the animation and Lunacy basically conceding that the animation was not an issue, they then move on to the actual film footage of the astronauts on the moon, and he makes yet again his same old tired baseless assertion. He says, and then they had an in-studio mock-up where they had 2 fake astronauts inside of a fake lander. We'll watch that bit of video here, and I'm going to add, at no point throughout this debate does Lunacy offer any evidence to support his claim. None. It's just libelous, unsupported assertions. That's all. At 50:58, Lunacy says, quote, they all got paid for it. That means all the scientists and all the engineers and all the private contractors that were working on the Apollo project, all those thousands of people got paid to keep their mouths shut. More baseless accusations of unethical and conspiratorial behavior by thousands of people. Okay, we're going to move on now to the next topic, which was GPS. At 52:30, the conversation moves to GPS, and that I'm going to call that the end of part 1. And we'll look at some of that stuff in the next video, which is going to allow us to take a look at the Royal Caribbean Cruise website and how navigation is done at sea, even though there are no cell towers in the vicinity. When you're out there in the wide open sea, you still need to be able to communicate in order to get the location data. So how do they do that if it's all with if GPS is not based with satellites but rather based with cell phone network? Well, the answer is you do it with satellites. That'll be in the next video. I'm not sure. I'm going to be gone next week. It might be a couple weeks before I can get another video out. I'll try hard to get one out before Tuesday when I leave. But if not, bear with me. There will be more. Thank you. This is FE Peer Review. Have a great day.